And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Today, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy agreeing to a limited ceasefire between Kyiv and Moscow. As President Donald Trump suggested during a call with the embattled country's leader, he consider American ownership of Ukraine's power plants to ensure their long-term security here. Another new novel foreign policy idea. Fox's Greg Palcott with more details.
Russian forces launching a massive air attack on Ukraine Tuesday night that targeted hospitals and transportation. The Ukrainian power grid was also hit. Less than an hour after President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed to a very limited ceasefire covering energy targets.
Let's take a big grain of salt here and let's remember our recent history of Vladimir Putin.
The two leaders spoke for about 90 minutes on Tuesday. The White House says a peace agreement was discussed. But Putin stopped short of signing off on a broader ceasefire and renewed his calls for an end to military aid to Ukraine, though President Trump denies that subject came up.
Right now, you have a lot of guns pointing at each other, and a ceasefire without going a little bit further would have been tough. I think we had a great call. It lasted almost 2 hours. Talked about a lot of things and toward getting it to peace.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said his country is open to proposals that lead toward ending the war, but rejected Putin's demand to stop foreign aid, warning it would weaken Ukraine. He is speaking with President Trump today, but says he's skeptical that Putin is ready for peace.
Any negotiations are a fragile opportunity, especially when it comes to the Russians, who have so far demonstrated their unwillingness to end the war.
National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will travel to Saudi Arabia on Sunday to continue talks on a full ceasefire. In London, Greg Palcott, Fox News.
Greg, thanks so much. So that was from a little earlier today, kind of highlighting some of the items out of the Trump-Putin phone call. Fox News' Rebecca Castor has more of a look, though, at the Trump-Zelenskyy phone call. Let's watch.
A moment of celebration in what's otherwise been a devastating 3 long years of war. In one of the largest prisoner exchanges of the conflict, Russia and Ukraine each returned 175 soldiers to their home countries on Wednesday.
We are home, happy in our native Ukraine, on our land.
Russia also released 22 seriously wounded Ukrainian soldiers in what the Kremlin calls an act of goodwill. It comes as the U.S. is trying to mediate an end to the war. After President Trump's phone calls with Putin and Zelenskyy, both leaders agreed to stop attacks on energy infrastructure.
We have never been this close to peace, and it's only because of President Trump that we are here.
Despite the administration's optimism, Putin still has demands before he'd agree to expand the ceasefire. He's implied all foreign military aid to Ukraine must stop, but the White House says that was not discussed. Zelenskyy, meanwhile, says he's in favor of an unconditional ceasefire.
Our negotiators are going from one side to the other, and we are driving both sides closer and closer.
Zelenskyy also asked Trump for more air defense support. The president agreed to help find more missiles, particularly in Europe. In Washington, Rebecca Castor, Fox News.
Rebecca, thanks so much. And this is how President Trump framed his phone call today with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, saying, I just completed a very good telephone call with President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. It lasted approximately 1 hour. Much of the discussion was based on the call made yesterday with President Putin in order to align both Russia and Ukraine in terms of their requests and needs. We are very much on track, and I will ask Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Michael Waltz to give an accurate description of the points discussed. That statement will be put out shortly here. And so I do have that statement in front of me here, but we want to talk about all of this with none other than the national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer, Hal Kempfer. He joins me. Hal, good to see you yet again here. So there's a lot to get to. First, before we get into kind of the meat of these phone calls here, you heard there in one of the reports, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt say, we have never been this close to peace before between Russia and Ukraine. Technically, is that accurate? Would you have made the same assertion?
I don't know if I would have quite phrased it that way, Andrew. Certainly in the last 3 years, we've never been that close to peace. But, the other side is there's still a long way to go. Basically, President Trump talked to President Putin, and Putin rejected the agreement, the ceasefire agreement that he'd worked out with President Zelenskyy already. So then he came up with this partial agreement, which depends on which press release or which statement you hear as far as whether it's energy infrastructure, energy and infrastructure. And then President Zelenskyy, what came out today was it was energy and civilian infrastructure. So I've heard three different things. All of those imply a different set of target sets, which may not seem like a big deal, but when you're talking about a partial ceasefire, the details of what is covered or what is not covered are pretty darn important.
Yeah.
And so it's really not clear what it is. As it was, all this discussions going on, and as was mentioned in those pieces, immediately afterwards, Russia launched a massive assault where they basically went back on anything tied to not hitting energy infrastructure. Ukraine also did a big attack as well. I'm not going to take away from that. And so I don't know how close we are to this thing actually coming together. It's interesting. Mike Waltz is going down there. Secretary Rubio is going down there. It's not as robust a team as I would have liked to have seen.
Down there, you mean to Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, very much.
So, Hal, I want to ask you about this idea that we have not heard before that was proffered in the joint statement by Waltz and Rubio. Saying this, I'm reading the paragraph, President Trump also discussed Ukraine's electrical supply and nuclear power plants. He said that the United States could be very helpful in running those plants with its electricity and utility expertise. American ownership of those plants would be the best protection for that infrastructure and support for Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Now, what does the United States want to do with power plants in Ukraine? That word ownership, yet again, why would we want anything to do with that?
It's rather clever, actually. It is very innovative. If the U.S. owns them and the U.S. is running them, U.S. personnel will be on the ground. Obviously, that kind of ensures that they won't be targeted. It also ensures that those plants will be operational, and Russia would be much more reluctant to go in there and of course that's been a problem. They have had nuclear plants hit. Of course, the big fear is, they talk about Ukraine. This is the land of Chernobyl. This is where the biggest nuclear accident ever occurred. So obviously, this has been a big issue. Also, they've been getting their electricity knocked out constantly. That's one thing that doesn't come out in the news that much, is how often their grid system's gone down because of these hits. Turning it over to the U.S. puts a really big onus on Russia. Do you want to take on the U.S. directly? Do you want to take on something it owns? Do you want to take on something where you're going to kill U.S. personnel? That's a completely different situation than the one is now. I find it very innovative. I find it creative. It's the first time I've heard in this entire conflict something quite like that. But then again, we are hearing a little bit more transactional issues popping up, like the minerals deal and stuff like that.
So, Hal, I have to ask, the ceasefire deals that are right now operative on the table, that have in some limited capacity been either agreed to by Ukraine or agreed to by Russia, what's the nature of them? Are they the same thing or not? Or are they just theoretical right now?
I've been asking that all day. Are they really coming together with the same thing? Are they talking the same thing? Because when you listen to them, it sounds like they've just agreed to the same thing. But when you look at the fine print, like what it is they're saying they're not going to hit, that's where you suddenly see these shades of difference pop up. So I still think they have more to do to really tighten up the terminology. What exactly are we talking about? And of course, the concern is, and this is the thing I think maybe Russia's kind of priming the pump for. Look, Russia's going to be inclined to say, no matter what happens, that somehow Ukraine violated the ceasefire agreement. And frankly, Ukraine will probably say the same thing about Russia, which will probably be true because Russia will violate the ceasefire agreement. So they really want to tighten up that terminology so it's very clear, unambiguous what it is that each side is not supposed to hit and for exactly how long. One of the things with some of these agreements, and this is something that's going in another part of the world with Iran, with another thing is when exactly does it start? They have to have a clear start date, a clear stop date as to when this takes place. And look to the Middle East. And, we all hope that a bigger ceasefire agreement is going to come out of this. Look, that was a big hope in the Middle East, in Gaza, and it timed out. It's over, and nothing replaced it.
Right. Hal, I just want to kind of acknowledge the coverage, including my own, in the wake of the very, very hostile reception that Volodymyr Zelenskyy got from President Trump and Vice President Vance. That was on February 28th, now about 20 days ago. Do you think at the time that the reporting, the coverage was alarmist and hyperbolic, that relations were done, at least for that time, that they were soured indefinitely? Because Trump and Zelenskyy were on the phone today, and they described, both parties described it as a pretty good phone call. There were some pleasantries, some jokes exchanged here. Were we being too alarmist at the time that the relationship would really, really suffer? Because 20 days later, I know hindsight's 2020, but 20 days later, they were on the phone again talking about these developments here.
I think we're all trying to read the tea leaves. This is exactly what happened in the Oval Office. I have to tell you, there's a considerable body of opinion out there that some of it looked a little orchestrated. When President Trump turned around and said this is going to make, this makes great television. It did have that sort of reality TV feel about it. And as you know, a lot of reality TV is actually scripted. So it did have kind of a feel like maybe this is something that had been thought about, discussed, and it could have been just something like, hey, look, if Zelenskyy brings this up, then, we need to say this or something like that. It may not be as heavily scripted as it looks to be, but the fundamentals are that the relationship needed to proceed. You can't have a peace agreement, a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine and Russia unless Ukraine is a party to it.
Okay.
And you can't have a minerals agreement with Ukraine unless Ukraine agrees to that.
Sure.
So there were some, as far as like who was holding all the cards, look, cards are being held all around. So regardless of some of the rhetoric, there did need to be a kind of bringing it back together. And it sounds like there's a cordial tone between the two leaders.
I mean, the word irreparable was being thrown and tossed around a lot in the wake of that meeting here, and it doesn't seem like that's the case, at least as far as the relationship goes. Hal Kempfer, as always, thanks so much. We'll talk soon.